Hi everyone, good evening. Today we are having our episode 4 of ArchiDesign Timber Talks for this spring semester 2022. And today guest is a very special person, Yuki Ikeguchi from Kengo Kuma Architects. And the presentation's title is Biophilic Design in Architecture. Demet Hanım, as usual, will be the moderator of this session. So without any time lost, I leave the word to Demet Hanım.
Okay, thank you,
Thank you.
Salih Hocam. Dear students, good evening, dear students, dear academicians, and dear faculty members. This evening, yes, we have a valuable guest from France, Paris. Maybe I can say we have a guest from Tokyo, Japan, Kengo Kuma and Associates. And I would like to introduce her briefly. Then I will leave the screen to her. She is partner architect at Kengo Kuma Associates in Japan, and she is also executive vice president of Kuma and Associates Europe Paris. She led the project of Odunpazarı Modern Museum in Eskişehir, designed by Kengo Kuma Associates. Water Culture House in Copenhagen, Denmark, Hans Christian Andersen House of Fairytales, Padova Congress Center in Veneto-Italy, Albert Kahn Garden Museum in Paris, France, Granada Performing Arts Center, Granada-Spain are also among the projects designed by their studio. Yuki expressed her design approach with the following words: fundamentals in my design approach are biophilic design that applies to our sense to generate the form of architecture in response to the surroundings, culture, history, and to the life between buildings through in-depth analysis and observation in macro scales simultaneously. This evening, Yuki's topic is biophilic design in architecture, and she will share 3 projects with us. And Thank you, Yuki. This screen is yours now.
Thank you. Thank you for nice introductions, and thank you for having me and giving me this opportunity to share our works. I would like to just go ahead and start sharing the screen now, if that's okay.
Yeah, I think it will work when you just hit the share button again.
Yeah. Is it showing now? Is it showing now?
No, not yet.
How about now? Sorry about that. Let me see what I can.
It's coming. Yes, perfect.
Okay, is it fine now?
Yes.
Okay, so I would start my presentation. My name is Yuki, as I didn't introduce you. I'm a partner at Kengo Associates. I'm representing Paris office branch, taking care of major projects in Europe, mainly outside France. So mainly Denmark, Italy, and of course the one in Turkey that was doing the design of architecture as well as an interior. What I've been interested in is pursuing the biophilic architecture. That's our core focus in designing architecture. And what it means is that we design with organic and natural elements that appeal to our senses and tendency to find comfort and inspiration to natural settings. Architecture states feel integrated with organic elements and made with natural materials. So basically, by being in a space, you feel almost as if you are in the middle of the nature, with full of natural lights, air, and the texture and tactile quality that appeals to all the senses, which is quite important for almost all settings. It doesn't matter for what purpose, to be a house or work environment or enjoying the cultural events and environments. The life between buildings, that's another the core focus in designing architecture. So implementing the architecture volume, it's not only to contain the space and life inside, but it is to create another space between the buildings. So the architectural implementation, the space between the urban space, between the buildings, the new ones, and also the existing ones, and it alters the urban life in between and how it engages activities in between, in and around the city. Creating new and open, inviting public spaces are one of the focus in our practice in design. And the last is to this unique simultaneous study in both urban and human scale. I call it this micro-macro design process. So seeing the buildings in both for the wide view, as well as seeing it from inside out. So how the human scale and urban scale, it comes into one. So when we are designing the architecture, not only seeing it from a space or viewpoints, but flying over to see the buildings from a macro scale. At the same time, we do take every aspect, the tangibility, the materiality into considerations at the same time. So this is what makes our architecture design unique, I believe. I would like to introduce three projects that we have designed, and first one is in Odunpazarı, Eskişehir, in the country. It's a modern art museum that was built and completed in 2019. It's about 4,500 square meters. And this is the site of the museum. As you can see, there's two different scales. And urban scale still in the quite harmonious way, the modern architecture built along this large boulevard. So semi-urban scale meets scale of the building, while in behind on the different another side of this new implementations of the museum, it's built in the old time Ottoman style residential building made out of wood. So our project site that was given sits in between this very traditional Ottoman style old timber buildings and residence versus the quite modern, contemporary mid-scale housing that sits in between. Main source of inspiration to derive of the architecture biometric composition is this local residential settlement in Odunpazarı, Eskişehir. As you can see, it builds along this meandering streets scape, and the house, of course, you know way better than I do, but it's in the built with this timber structure that are quite traditional method, the timber frames. And what we find very charming and unique is this upper volumes of the house that is rotated and cantilevered. This makes the void space along the street in between these two housing volumes that are set along this street. The void space in the streetscape becomes very unique and quite intimate and almost in a dynamic animated manner. Another aspect that we looked into is this simple geometry and complex constructed by a simple geometric patterns in Islamic architecture that we find to be extremely attractive and makes the volume far more unique. The last is this nature in the public complex that we find quite intriguing in mosque. While the aggregations of the small volumes are derived or generated along towards the external parameters, when it gets polar and polar towards the center, which becomes the highlight of the volumes. And the contrast of the lights in between the shadows and the sharp inside natural light is something that we find very beautiful and intriguing. So all this has been implemented in some level of interpretation of how we see and extract the essence of traditional architecture and what we find relevant to relate to in the surrounding context. So as you can see, how we took the volumes that it starts with the rather a small one residential building scale, and we have stacked them, rotated them as it goes higher. So in a way that the building as a total, it has a scale of the urban architecture. However, each individual boxes that are stacked and aggregation of them, it still relates to a scale of the small residential buildings adjacent to this architecture. And what we want to still keep is this sense of public openness. So the plaza that are adjacent to it is intentionally kept as the large open space where it will be accessible and through and connecting to adjacent cultural facilities such as wax museums or hammam museum. And walk-through experience, like we keep the streetscape continuous all the way inside the building, is another attempt, the sequence of the space that I wanted to create, so that the building, it doesn't become a blockage, but rather to take in this sense of continuity of the streetscape, not just to this plaza, but all the way into the building floor, the journey through the exhibition. So this is the effects that you see and experience from the ground floor approaching to the museum. So how the stacking of the boxes and rotation of the boxes, it breaks the scale into a small aggregates. And it doesn't present itself as the large singular object or the mass, but it has this sense of openness, especially at the ground floor. It invites you in a very special way. This is the floor plan, how the visitors would approach and enter through this entrance. And at first, we would be approached through this foyer that are higher level than the lower foyer. So this is the section through the buildings, how one approach at the one level higher and descending and rotates around this central void and approach to the lower level of the site. This section illustrates well how one atrium is created, the central atrium is created to let the light in, and also it's since it's in a rotating configuration, it lets you find a way to the gallery and going up. It's almost like a navigation point that you walk through the museum in the sequence of the exhibition that visitors will encounter. So this is how the central atrium behind these volumes are created. And as you can see, in the form of the steps, rather bleachers fanning around and revolving around this central atrium. And as if the timber, the facade configurations are translated and to become sort of inside-outside feeding by having this timber structure also implemented to compose this atrium as well as the step and bleachers. So we worked very well with the owner of the building which is Mr. Kavancha. He's the collector of the Turkish arts and some of the European arts that has been already planned to exhibit in this museum. But what we wanted to create is more than showing the collections, but also to recreate this venue that are large enough to accommodate the installations or the large-scale sculpture pieces at the ground floor. So the access that we have planned for loading in art could have a flat and singular level access to make this make use of this large scale exhibition spaces. And this is how one begins the exhibition journey. So at the ground floor, rather a large proportion space, the large footprint and tall ceiling height up to 7 meters are accommodated to house this large scale installation. And at the ground floor, as well as the elevated plaza level, it has this very interactive, dynamic visual connections at the beginning of the journey, of the exhibition, as well as the cafe above. And this space in between the rotating bleachers are meant to be used for a very spontaneous gathering space, to be used for lecture, or just a spontaneous spots for reading, or having coffee and just meet with your friends. This is one of the tallest exhibition space we created intentionally at the lower level. And by having this box stacking and interlocking one another, at the interlocking points at the different level of the exhibition, the visual connections and the visibility is possible to enjoy and appreciate these art pieces that are installed at the ground floor. So this special, very site-specific installations was created by Japanese artists that are used. He is a former or current the craftsperson to make installations and the pieces of arts and or the functional items out of the string of bamboo, which we harvest the bamboo pieces of these bamboo gardens, the forest, and make pieces for such multiple purposes. And this one in particular, we saw the site and we decided to create this very organic growing pieces out of the wooden string of bamboos. And this is entirely made with hands, without any nails or connections in between. And this organic, almost like a creature sculpture piece, are leaning against the wall. And this matches pretty well, works with the natural light quite well. And he believes that this installation is also be recreated by dismantling them with the artist and to recreate it and relocate it in elsewhere. So it's a very sustainable and reincarnation kind of concept that makes the art pieces rather unique and very site specific. And the first level is entirely dedicated for the exhibitions. And as I was trying to say earlier, that the whole exhibition sequence is revolving around this atrium space that are gently rotating towards the upper level. And this atrium, it's not a typical atrium where it's just a large void, but it tends to capture the natural lights coming through these skylights. It gently filters and to light the exhibition space without exposing the art pieces to this natural light too much. So it works well as the light well, given adequate natural lights to exhibit the arts around. And only at the last floor, it opens and floats. There's a floating piece right below the skylight. So one could look into the space below. So we are imagining this atrium space for future as well to install the site-specific installation. This is the compositions of the atrium. So on the top, it has this glass skylight to let the natural light in. And the space, when you look up, it appears as such. So it has this very playful, dynamic feature. At the same time, it gives this sense of orientations and guidance to the journey of the exhibition, and to softly scale these filters, the natural lights in each level, without being too much and compromising too much of the artificial lights to proper exhibitions for art pieces. And this atrium and space around it always generates and going down to the projection rooms underneath. So the steps and bleachers continues all the way down to reach this lower level, while the natural lights are rather cut, and these projections would be possible and to be seen just sitting around this bleacher spaces. And facade is we have been inspired by a stacking of the wood that we find really bound in the adjacent timber buildings around the site. And also we have this tradition as well in Japanese timber construction. It's called the azekurazuku. It's simply structural and stacked by this solid wood. But of course, in this Odunpazarı Museum, we have chosen to have a large span of the building inside. So it's a hybrid of a steel structure and the applications of the timber frame around and timber screen for the cladding. We have strategically applied by identifying the wall types in facade aperture, middle facade aperture. So type of wood is Siberian yellow pine and sourced from a broad manufacturer in Turkey. So this is the group laminated glue lumps, which allows us to have a large span and to have self-supporting facade system. So it is installed as in the interlocking structure, but sometimes it's been suspended from above, sometimes it's stacked and be supported from the ground up. So it varies, depends on the type of the space that we want to create. Inside, one becomes a screen to be seen from exhibition spaces, and sometimes it becomes also a screen to public spaces at the ground floor. Yep, and that's the end of the presentation for Odunpazarı Museum. Second project that I wanted to present is the one that I'm working on in Milan, Italy. And this is a project that utilizes the timber both for structure as well as for the finishes. So it's called the Terrazza Verde. And the function of the building is for multi-purpose, mainly for office. But it contains some food and beverage facilities and some large public piazza that engages and offers a comfortable space for a neighboring community. So we have started looking into, again, the large macro view, and to find that this outskirt, the site given in the outskirt of Milan, it has this plenty of opportunity to play with the scale. And as you can see, in the there's abundance of a void and open space that our future buildings can well take advantage of. So it's not a very tight vertical structure that are needed to limit the footprint, but we can play with a good proportion of the open space versus the built spaces for offices. So rather than pursuing the very stereotype of the vertical glass office towers, I've looked into having the opportunity to play with the horizontality of the building. So the building configurations is almost structured in the hands, the finger manner. So there's 5 fingers that spread, and in between each fingers, with plenty of natural lights, and the ventilations can be planned. So each office space has this opportunity to be exposed fully, either in form of terrace or the courtyard, or interior garden in between. And these funding structures are closing, meaning that the taller buildings are setting closer to the adjacent plot to close almost the courtyard typology of the adjacent building site, and slowly start going down inside and to become a human scale, a 1-story height that are closer and adjacent to the natural park next to it. And being the suburb of Milan, there's this opportunity to play also with the arriving points of the metro. So crossing point of this boulevard, it has this high density traffic. So having this beam in the corner side, we have made it as a highlight and playful presence, both in the human scale and the urban scale, to express the visual encounter from the prominent location of the site. So as you can see, the site next to it, it has this large office complex already. So the manipulation of the scale is that it's a public space for the street that are smaller and directly new towards the natural park of the that are placed next to the site. And when it's facing to the large boulevard, it has this entrance or the scale for creating office space. So we have generated the volumes that are goes higher towards the adjacent building, higher building, and then it goes lower towards the natural settings of the park next to it. And stretching the lines from the metro entry all the way to the line and approach to the park, we have inserted many pockets of the greens. So every office space or the retail space has an opportunity to take advantage of this greenery and open space in between. And having the multiple entrances to this entire development, it also creates a flow and more of the activations on the street front, placing commercial program along the large street of Via-Rizzoli, and smaller streets where they replace the piazza is more for the purpose of the inviting community and activating the piazza. So the volume gets taller towards the adjacent side, consists of office building, the taller office building, and as it grows and becomes lower, it consists of more of the activity programs such as cafe, restaurants, and commercial spaces that would spill out to the green plaza to animate the whole site. And this is at the end how the compositions are considered for the entire building. So the total part of building, it echoes and speaks and creates a dialogue with the adjacent tower that are also in office space. And as the building becomes lower, and it relates to the adjacent park, which has the intensive greenery beyond. As you can see, each of the roofs are vegetated, and to have a roof garden, a series of the roof garden is visible at each office spaces in every level. And this is how one would experience standing on the top of one of the top roof, and the vegetated roofs and the gardens cascading down and relate to the greenery beyond this Parco. So almost that building becomes the part of the greenery and landscape, especially when you are standing in front on the top of the roof that are adjacent to each office tenants. And standing on the ground level, the street level, we have planned this cranking landscape that are in echoing of this configuration, cascading configurations of this timber of this building. And vegetations and trees are rather to be lush and seasonal. So as one go through the park, you can see sense the seasons and different lush and density of the trees around. And this is also to echo the building language of clearly timbered and the roof that are fully vegetated. And as you can see, our attempt is to create the human scale and relationship in the horizontal low height building when people are walking and experiencing and enjoying the public piazza. And towards the end of the site, a building increases its height. So unlike the very stereotypical type and typical building office typology, we don't have this tall, blazing, singular, repetitious planning, but the building, it has this dynamic, it has this unique animated character from perceived from outside as well as experiencing from inside. And by having this rotation and movement in cascading and lowering the height, this simple movement creates this dynamic appearance and appeal when you are standing at the crossing point approaching to the building. So once again, this adding to this character, this inviting, activated character, it gives more animated feelings for the visitors and as well as for the people who lives around, for the community around. And this is approaching from under the canopy and to one of the courtyard, which has its own entrance for the office on the left-hand side and the retail on the right-hand side. So this creates this very interlocking, interlocked spaces for both the outside space and inside space. In entrance to the office complex, it contains the multiple tenants for the offices in the upper levels. We have created this interior garden, an atrium space that is covered with the glazing wood. And it offers this microclimate that gives the fresh air to the tenants and natural light once again for each office spaces. And each of the spaces has this opportunity to have common areas that could be used for a meeting or casual greetings and walk along after a certain hours. So that it gives opportunity to breathe. And we find it quite relevant in a time now, while we went through the pandemic period, of this need of being exposed to semi-exterior zones that are fully ventilated with the natural air and the spaciousness that you can choose to be out almost in this kind of natural settings, but still protected, adequate enough for walking alone or walking in smaller groups. So you have this need, especially in the time now, of this flexible and quality workspaces, both in the focused area or in more spontaneous open fresh air semi-outdoor environments. And structure of this building is mostly timber, or rather hybrid with steel. So the primary structures are composed of steel, So it gives a steadiness and the flexibility to achieve large span, as large as 8.6 meters. So it gives a good level of flexibility for office planning. And at the same time, we have focused and utilized as much timber structure and finishes as possible for the rest of the structure. So primary blue lamps are to support this CLT slab, the cross laminated timber floor slabs. So these would be exposed to internal spaces. So this is also perceived as a finish to the experience from walking people inside. So the basement is composed first, they will be constructed first, and they, together with the core, they are built. They are to be built with the concrete, and the steel frames are for the primary structure to achieve a large span for flexible workplaces, and CLT the cross-laminated timbers slabs are composed on the top of the blue lamp secondary structure, and so on. So this section through this typical office spaces are as such. As you can see, it has we have made this raised floor systems with the 60 centimeters of the depth. All the services, the ducts, mechanical and electrical services would run under the floor. So to keep the timber structure free, any installation except for the lighting. So as you can see, it's a hybrid of the steel structure. So steel structures are exposed and that are spanning and enable flexible settings for office up to 8.6 span. And in between, we have set the timber structure. So to support the CLT slabs above. The CLT slabs are meant to be exposed. So this is at the same time purely exposed structure expression without excessive finish around. And this space is the effect of it. It's a very structure expressions and honest and warm tone of this exposed timber beams. And that's the effect of this courtyard in between would give. So it gives a very plenty of natural lights ingress, and it gives both good balance of the protected area to office, so you can work of the minimum artificial lights and still have a good level of natural lights coming from and through this courtyard in between. And what I wanted to achieve is this very horizontal expressions of the building by keeping the exterior walls mainly with the clear glazing. So at the ground floor and street level, what you see and what's perceived of the expression of the architecture is this exposed timber structure, and underside all the cantilever leaves above. And what we see at the ground floor is this steel columns that are rather spaced apart in a good span, and it gives a floating effect of this light timber structure. And by having it steel, the columns not only just achieving the large span, it minimizes the footprints, how it engages on the ground level and each typical level of the offices. So this gives also this feeling of sensation, the floating sensation, and feeling of a large open space in the inhabitable areas of the project. And walking along this smaller street of the Akatsan, this landscape are planned to give a maximum amount of greenery for the public piazza. And this is completely in margin integrations with the language of the architecture, the green cascading roof that are in tune and in harmony with the adjacent natural park settings. And this project has some multiple purposes, and the core aspect in the sustainability. It's not only making the building out of timber and reducing the carbon footprint, but also integral approach that we have taken by utilizing the certain codes, lead and well being the main instruments and assessment codes. And we have looked into closely life cycle assessments, daylight analysis, and acoustic. So all has been optimized to develop the design to the best level we can to achieve the sustainable building. So reducing demands, the energy use, the load, and increasing efficiency, and use renewable alternative energy source as much as possible by optimizing building envelope and demands for both heating and cooling and lighting. And energy efficient MEP systems are also simultaneously rolled out by our collaborating engineers. And how we use the water source, it's also considered in a close analysis, being rainwater, greywater we use, and so on. And by looking mostly at timber into use of the structure as well as for finishes, we have achieved almost close to 20% of the embodied carbon structural components relative to the traditional solutions, namely concrete structure. And our strategy to reduce the embodied carbon of the building life cycle is also extended to other aspects of construction. One of it is the on-site reuse of a demolition of waste, such as concrete. So recycling the existing concrete when it's demolished, so that we can crush them into sizing to suitable for a foundation substrate of a new building and so on. So each step of the way from a construction methods to use of the materials, we have done a careful analysis and considerations for building a new building. And our approach in nature-based solutions, in considering open space and green roof and extended use of the vegetation, as way of mitigating the local microclimates through evaporations of the roof mass and reducing the heat island effects. And of course, contributing offsetting the emissions of CO2 produced during the operational stage. And so on, and of course, creating the environments that are enhancing the social interactions. That is something quite important to pursuing the biophilic environment. The last project that I would like to introduce is the project that we have just finished, the Hans Christian Andersen Museum. This has a different approach in project that started with the authors that are quite representative of the Danish culture and literature, Hans Christian Andersen. And this building has a different dimensions of seeing the building inside out, meaning that we needed to interpret how we see the work of the author and translate it into the architectural form. So in this project, we have extracted essence of his stories as a writer. One of the essence was this duality and non-frontal, multi-directional, and edgeless structure of his story, and we have implemented into this continuous curved linear hedges that traces the fairy tale exhibition space underground. So this project consists of series of circles, and the hedges traces the circles, and circles are created in planning for planning of the exhibitions underground. And biophilic design is achieved by these extensive gardens in this project, in this particular project, and that are working quite closely with the timber structure. And some of the spaces that we favored, it's a trimmed hedge, and that has this unique quality and to express it something in between the architecture and the natural garden space. In the sunken garden that are inserted among this exhibition space, sunken underground, is the connections of the what we call it as a reality above ground and fantasy world below ground. This picture that I've taken during the construction site is one of my favorites and the most exciting moments when the structure comes alive and these bare expressions of the structural expressions of the concrete together with this built ramp. It has this purity of meandering paths and this sense of being lost in being underground space that are about to become something unrealistic, something fantastical. So this moment of meandering paths that I'm one of the most characteristic space that I believe we successfully made in the Hans Christian Andersen this creations of the exhibition. Now we have looked into the use of the timber in this project is for a structure as well as for the facade, supporting the facade above ground. Taking the inspiration again, like we did it in the Odunpazarı Museum, reading the traditional ways of making a timber building in the Danish construction culture, and reinterpreting them in hybrid of a natural expression of the branches. So something in between the traditional architecture and nature. So the building structure is in such that it has the skin and the supporting structure for a glazing facade, but also this is to support the roof of the building. So it's working both the structural and substructure to support the facade. So the radial beams are connected from the structural columns at the perimeter of the facade, as well as tying back to the structural core. So this is how the buildings, the roof structure and joists are built in this manner in each pavilions for a cafe and for children's rooms, which is the creative studio for children, and shopping pavilion, shop pavilions, which is also containing the foyer. So it's the beginning of the journey throughout the entire museum space. So these photos are also taken during the construction, how the glue lamps, the spruce in these projects, these are mounted in the concrete circular core and connected back to the beams of columns at the perimeter, also to support the facade. So this project, we have also applied the cross-laminated timber as a roof slab. And this is the view looking up to the beams and the roof structure. And this is the result of how the effect the split state will be. And as you can see, it is our always an attempt to relate to and make a link to the adjacent environment. So the new implementation is not the foreign objects, but it's something that links the history and the past and towards the future of the city always. And by having this glue lamps and one can sense this continuation from exterior to interior, so the space that are in between the exhibition space and the street state are something of the margin in between. So the pavings composed with the granite, this cobblestone, that are continuous from the street and all the way into the foyer space. And the shops as well, it's composed with the similar structural method of having this glue lamp timber structure and to express as a cladding in support for the exterior glazing facade. And this is one of the moments where the artwork that tells the story, one of the story of Andersen, interacts with the meandering path of the ramp, which is quite architectural. And this is the last slide. Sorry, maybe it was a bit extended, but how the architecture becomes kind of a unique platform, the landscape feature, as well as to become a cultural venue for each people and visitors and the neighbors would be able to enjoy and to become more like a fun space to be. So this is what I meant in a combination of appeal to the biophilic nature, as well as to become something that contributes to activations of the neighborhood and the city. So yes, this is the last slide. Thank you very much for now.
Okay, thank you very much, Yuki, for the impressive presentation. I really liked all projects because you used timber, concrete, and steel as well as which construction materials we have to use it, and it's really good examples of 3 different timber structural material that you used, so perfect. And maybe some of academicians and students can ask some questions to you. Now I am checking the board. Yeah, one of our friends or students has a question. I can't see the question. I'm sorry. I will check.
Shall I read it?
Yes, please.
Okay. By the way, many thanks for your presentation, Ms. Ikeguchi. It was very inspiring. So Evra Ayşe Ercan is asking, on the second example, some of the green roofs were cut in the middle. Was there a reason for that?
What do you mean by cut in the middle? Well, if I may just assume the question, there's on the top of the roof, we needed to insert the solar panels, the photovoltaic panels, and also that there are some spaces that we needed to assume for a core and the circulations around. So yes, some of the roofs are cut for those purposes to accommodate the overheads and the bulkheads of the elevators and staircases, and also for the purpose of placing the photovoltaic panels. Yeah, it's not shown as such in the drawings, but this is how it's turned out to be.
Okay.
Okay, thank you for the question and
Nilay Hocam.
for the answer. Yes, Nilay
Yes,
Hocam.
Nilay Hocam wants to ask a question. Yes, please, Nilay Hocam.
First of all, thank you very much for your stimulating and inspiring presentation. In fact, I have a general question. Also, you mentioned about the issues that entered our lives with pandemics while explaining some of your projects. In fact, your design approach seems to be very compatible with the issues that entered our lives, in fact, with the pandemics, in terms of the human scale, creating new public spaces, relationship with nature. Are there any additional issues you started considering with the pandemic in your design approach? Especially I am asking with relation to biophilic design.
Yes, of course. Yes, actually, there are, I mean, first we have encountered a lot of challenges to deal with this pandemic, but we realize more and more that our design is really could be a good response and solutions for tackle this situation. And because from the very beginning, we have been appealing to this biophilic design using as many open spaces as possible, and also using the natural materials and to implement vegetation as much. But in fact, before it was more difficult because it costs a lot, and it's not it makes even more. It's not repetitious. You cannot just modularize everything and to repeat the same plan, but there's some sense of diversity and variations, and also to have greens in the building. It also concerns a lot for the future maintenance. So there are many clients who are quite reluctant to spend so much and to foresee so much maintenance. But now it's an appeal. I mean, as an office, of course, they have to appeal to the tenants, and it becomes an appeal. So it was sort of, in a way, I would say, I don't want to say this, but it was a bit of a fortunate opportunity for us to convince the clients. Because of this pandemic situation, our design is more appreciated in a way, and more accepted by a wider range of the clients. So that's nice. But also for instance, using the staircase has also become more well received because using the elevator for a tall building, you put yourself in a very contained small spaces, which is not very good for our house, and especially in a pandemic situation. So we have managed to introduce a lot of staircases, which is good for house considerations and for our benefits. So things like this, more open spaces and density for the office, and using the capacity of for user of the building, it's less dense than before. So the benchmark for us, it's towards more spacious and more enhanced directions. So the requirements becomes workable for us and more favorable for us.
Thank you very much. I think it was very explanatory.
Okay. We are looking for questions. If someone asks questions, maybe Elif Hocam has a question.
Man Hoca raised his hand first.
Oh, okay. Please.
No, please, Elif Hoca, please.
Okay, thank you, Man Hoca.
Yeah, no problem, please.
My question is, thank you for the presentation first. My question is, has a general nature. So how was architects' daily life after COVID period? So within the office, are there many changes in the daily life of your architects? Do you have now more online meetings, or is there more possibilities to work from distance and so on? How is the organization, the changes about the organization of daily work life?
Nowadays, it's coming back to how it was before, but we learned a good way of communications to each other in a remote situation. So, of course, many of us needed to and chose to work at home remotely. So I believe we learned to be more self-sufficient and independent in a way, trusting each other's time spent and trusting each other's will and the managing time. So that was quite a good practice, I would say. But for architects, it's especially when we think about the designing together, it's not very easy to be apart. So we needed to be together in brainstorming and thinking and developing by discussion. Remote work, sometimes it's not that feasible to do it. And also to see the site and work with the contractor and construction site is something very physical. So in that way, then the remote work was imposing us much of a challenges. Yeah, but I suppose we learned to cope with it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Man Hocam. Yeah, Man Hocam.
Yes. Hi, hello, thank you. Yeah, thanks you very much for this really very interesting and inspiring presentation. Examples are really very illustrative, especially for me in person. I think for our students, in terms of concept, inspiration, material use, spaces, indoor, outdoor spaces for the museums. I have one question for the Odunpazarı Museum and the second example, the Milano project. As a macro scale, you just showed the macro scale is taking into consideration the surrounding. From one side is several museums. It is really coping as an urban grain. From the other side, it's not obvious for me. Is it because of the angle or something else? This is my first question. Same for this project. When we look to the entrance of the museum, normally we are expecting more spacious, I mean, in terms of dimension. So is it also, we don't know, I mean, the scale is not obvious for us also, is it? But as a proportion, for me, it seemed that, I mean, it raised a question mark here about the dimension of the entrance. For the second project, you mentioned that the structure is from steel. So what was the role of those waffle-like wooden beams? Aesthetic. There has no structural role in the project. I mean, those are my questions, and thanks you very, very much for this really very interesting and inspiring presentation. Thanks a lot.
So maybe starting with Odunpazarı. So your question was how the architecture relates to the surrounding. Is that your first question, right? One side you mentioned that it might have some relevance, but the other side we weren't sure if it's relating to the context. Is that your question? If I may recap, what was your question referring to?
Yes. At the macros, when we look at the macro scale, you said that the museum has taken into consideration the surroundings. From one side, there were 3 museums, and it's obvious it is really it is took into consideration. From the other side, I think it's a residential. It's not obvious as maybe because of the angle. This is my question.
Yeah, okay. Well, yeah, it's true. It may not be so obviously related.
Sorry. Because when we look to the slide, it is not obvious that the museum it appears that is dominating the other side. But I mean, it was just maybe it's because of the angle that the photo was taken or the picture was taken.
Okay. You mean by the angle of a photograph?
Maybe this is I raised this question mark because from one side it's copying the surrounding, from the other side it appears like dominating the surrounding. This is it.
Yes, perhaps one could perceive as such because of the scale, I suppose. Well, the building has its own scale and it has a limited footprint. So, of course, it's inevitable that the building would become larger scale than the adjacent residential building. And this is what I tried in making the aggregation. So that instead of imagine that if you just simply extrude the architecture to satisfy the required square meters, it would just become a massive tall building. While we break down into smaller boxes. So each box might have relevance in terms of scale to one house, the one residential house. By stacking them, it becomes this very tall presence of the architecture. And also, what we have tried is to have a smaller volumes at the footprint, and we set it back. And stacking of the volumes becomes taller towards the end, towards the center. So when you are right next to the building, you don't encounter this tall building, but you see a height of the residential building. So in a way that it's not like mimicking the language or the design of the existing house, but looking into the scale of the house. So that by stacking them, by aggregating them, we break it down into a smaller scale. And when you see it on the street, what you perceive is the small portion and not the big one altogether. And this goes the same for the second project of the Palazzo Verdi. Exactly the same strategy is applied in a very different geometric structure. Starting from a low, so the ground floor and the first story is what you see and what you experience when you're right next to the building, but it goes towards farther away from the street. So it's not like a big tall walls that are up against you, but it's by stepping down towards the end, and that's how you relate yourself to a human scale, what we call.
Okay.
And the answering to your questions about this grandness of the foyer, of course, the site was constrained and the square meters we needed to satisfy. But besides that, what I wanted to create is this sense of street scale, though, because, you know, the Odunpazarı neighborhood, as I was showing at the very beginning of the slide, is it composes by these small residents that are planned along the meandering street. And by rotation of the upper levels, it creates this very intricate small space in between. So in the museum, what I wanted was to create this same sensation of going inside the building. It's not a traditional, very a conventional large atrium space where one encounters this grandness, but rather more of the street scale that are consistent and continuous inside the building. So I would say that was intentional, but also to meet the required space within the height was what was necessary, almost inevitable to have that scale. But I believe we have dealt with it in such a way that it conceptually and physically, it achieved this same scale meandering path outside of the building and inside of the building. So that was the second, altogether, first section of your question. And to answer to your second question about the project in Milan, it is completely structural. It's not decoration. And that's what I was trying to explain, that the steel frame is the primary structure only. And so it's intentionally used as to achieve the large span of the building. Because the timber frames, if you were to span it in such scale, the columns as well as the beam becomes really big. So efficiency and flexibility of the office building use, it becomes a little bit a constraint because of that style. By having the primary structure in steel, it allows the lifespan, but with a very small footprint. And the beams are composed and spanning in between this large frame of 8.6 meters to let the CLT slab sit on the top. So altogether, it's essential. Not by having everything, it makes the whole building structure possible. So without the beams, you cannot apply the CLT. And CLT on its own cannot span such a large distance. So everything is structural. Everything is working as a part of the building components.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Many thanks.
Okay, thank you, Yuki, for this answers also. I think there's no question.
Actually, I have one very
Okay.
general question, Demet Hocam, if I may.
Yes, please.
Again, many thanks for this very nice and inspiring presentation. We saw very good examples. One of them is very close to us here in Turkey. I wonder in general, in the previous, let's say, episodes of this ArchiDesign Timber Talks, we saw buildings from Canada, buildings from the Northern Europe, other parts of Europe. How is it in Japan in general with the timber structures? In Turkey, it is, let's say, in development phase. We start to see more, let's say, timber products in buildings. How is the general situation in Japan? That's what I'm wondering, actually.
Oh, no. Japan has one of the highest costs, and being that traditionally we used mainly timber and only timber, but the concerning aspect of it becomes evident in a recent in the modern time that we need to cope with the seismic requirements, and as well as for fire issues remain still challenging. But of course, many technical aspects has been developing to use and be able to use the timber to the fullest extent, being the structural use for multiple levels and the larger scale of the building. And I would say the glulam is a recent invention, rather, in scale of in comparison to the typical or traditional timber structure. That would enable us to have large span and to have appropriate treatments without concerning the dimensional movements of the timber. It's well controlled dimensionally, and there's a stability and strength in having these glulamps and CLT as well. So those has opened up a lot of possibilities also in construction in Japan. So it's been changing, and I think it would have more opportunity for us both in Japan using the traditional method as well as to use this new method of engineered wood. So yeah, I think it becomes more and more interesting, I think, in Japan also.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your time, for your presentation, for your answers. Thank you very much for all. I think we have a donate for your name. Salih Hocam, maybe
Yes,
you want to say some words.
Yes, I can make this small announcement to conclude the meeting. Many thanks again for all your contribution, Ms. Ikeguchi. We have a little tradition here in our faculty. We make a small donation in the name of our guests who contribute to these ArchiDesign talks. So we made a small donation in your name for SEI Foundation, which works for the education for the children. So again, many thanks for your time and effort to contribute to this ArchiDesign Timber Talks. And for everyone, thank you for participating, for listening to this presentation. And we are looking forward for, let's say, the next episode, Demet Hocam. Thank you also.
Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Yuki, for all your effort. Thank you.
Very much. Bye.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.